Hello, everyone. Am I audible to everyone? Could you please react if you can all hear me? All right, we'll start in a couple of minutes. We'll wait for a few more attendees to join. All right. So once again, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Zoho Flow for Zoho One webinar series. This is episode 3 of the series, and we have accounting and finance workflow ideas for Zoho One users. In the last episode, we discussed sales and marketing workflows, and a lot of you requested that we continue this domain-based workflow ideas for the webinar series. And so this time, we have come up with finance workflows involving apps like Zoho Books, Zoho Invoice, Zoho Inventory, and so on. So my name is Arjun, and I'm a product marketer for Zoho Flow. We're also joined by Ramya from the support team. So she'll take care of your questions during and after the webinar. A few general announcements before we begin. Firstly, you will be on mute by default, but if you do have any questions as I speak, you can always use the questions tab. We'll answer your questions from there. We also have a Q&A session after that, so you can do it either way. We'll also have a few questions for you in the form of polls, which will help us understand the audience and will also help me tailor my session. And finally, you all will receive a recording of this webinar after the session. So there will be a couple of questions to you now. So please answer the poll. You can also go to the polls section to see the questions there. So please do answer them. I'll wait for a minute and then we'll carry on. I think there is a small technical issue with the poll. So we'll we'll just go ahead. All right. So what are we going to discuss today? Firstly, we'll discuss what workflow is and what workflow automation is. We'll just go through the basics so that everyone here is on the same page. And then we'll just understand why you should use Zoho Flow for automating your workflow, especially when you're using the Zoho One suite, which will be followed up with a demo of the platform. We'll build a workflow from scratch in Zoho Flow so you can understand how to build a workflow using all the different features and different components of a workflow. We will then move to the interesting part where we'll discuss ideas, like workflow ideas of some very easy to implement use cases in finance and accounting. And finally, we'll have the question and answer session. All right, so what is a workflow? So if you look at your daily work in an organization, you will see that for any process, there would be a lot of workflows that together make up that process. In other terms, there would be a set of tasks that are needed to complete a certain process. So just imagine the case of invoice management. It's a process, right? So under that, you will have, let's say, when an invoice is created, you will need that invoice to be sent to a customer. You will need the details of that invoice to be moved to a spreadsheet and so on. There would be another set of tasks when an invoice is paid. When a payment is made, you would have a different set of tasks which will be followed. So each of these series of tasks will be performed based on an event in an app. In the first example, when an invoice is created, steps A, B, and C has to be performed, right? So these set of tasks that are to be executed based on an event makes a workflow. And the starting event is called the trigger. And the steps that follow are called the actions. Now, when you look at an organization or even a team, like let's say a finance team, you would see that there would be hundreds of different workflows like this that are used on a day-to-day basis. And because of the fact that almost all of these workflows have repeatable steps, which means that the steps are essentially the same. It's only the data moving between them change every time. And because they are repeatable in nature, they can be automated. And when you automate those workflows, you not only save a lot of time and effort from your employees, but you also reduce the number of errors that could creep into your data. So that's what workflow automation is and the use of workflow automation. Let's look at the components of a workflow now. So we already discussed about what are the different things that make up a workflow. Let's see how it works in Zoho Flow or any other workflow automation platform. So when you take a workflow, something has to happen in an app for that workflow to start. So we call that a trigger. So in the case of, in the first example that we mentioned, it is the invoice created in, let's say, Zoho Books, which is the trigger for this workflow. So whenever that happens, this workflow will be initiated. And then there would be one or more steps that follow this trigger, right? So let's call them actions. And in most cases, you would have certain logical conditions that you may need to branch your workflow, right? So this logical conditions can be of various types. One can definitely be conditional branching. So based on a certain condition, your workflow will take branch A, B, or C, depending on how your organization is set up. Or you may need to add certain wait times before an action is performed. So in Zoho Flow, it's called a delay. You can also add custom scripts in between actions or as an action. So that's another logic element. So there are a variety of logic elements that can be added to your workflow. So these three components make up a workflow. And this is the format that you will see anywhere you look at any kind of task you perform in your business. you will see that it's all made up of similar formatted workflows. Now, why do you need to use Zoho Flow for workflow automation? Especially when you're using Zoho One, you would already know that a lot of applications would have built-in integrations, or we call them native integrations. If you go to Zoho Books, you can see that there's an integrations module, and you can see that it has integrations with, say, Zoho CRM, uh, Shopify, for example, and there will be a variety of these integrations available, right? But uh, you could also have, let's say, if you don't find an integration there, you can always check Zoho Marketplace for a plugin, or you can also write your own script for a custom integration. Now, imagine two organizations. In organization A, they use a combination of all these approaches: built-in integrations, marketplace plugins, and code for their different use cases. Now, we also look at organization B. Here, they use one single workflow automation platform like Zoho Flow to manage all their integrations. If an IT admin or a team leader needs to have a bird's eye perspective of all the integrations in a team or that organization, which organization would be easier to manage? It would definitely be organization B, because you can build your workflows there. In case you want to make changes to them or to manage them, you can always do that in the same platform. In case some errors creep in, or if something fails, if an integration fails, it becomes so much more easier to fix that if all your integrations are organized in a single platform. So it makes so much more sense, especially when you're using Zoho One, because Zoho Flow is a part of that package. It makes so much more sense to use Zoho Flow to bring all your integrations under this single platform. And with having extensive support for applications like Zoho Books and Zoho Invoice, where you have a lot of triggers and actions available, like more than any other integration platform in the market, Zoho Flow is a no-brainer. So now let's look at the platform. Let's explore the platform, and let's also build a workflow from scratch in Zoho Flow. The use case that we are going to use here is a very simple document and folder management based on invoice generation. So the use case goes like this. Imagine that you're in, your team is handling tax filings, or let's say financial document analysis or something, and you want to create folders for your clients whenever an invoice is created, so that they can upload their financial documents there. So let's see how this workflow can be designed. So the trigger should be invoice created in, let's say, Zoho Invoice. When an invoice is created, we need to create a folder in Zoho Workdrive. So the first step of this workflow should be creating a folder in Zoho Workdrive. We also need to create an external share link for this particular folder. So that's the second action. Now, once the external share link is created, we need to send that via mail to the client. So this is the third action. Now let's see how we can build this in Zoho Flow. So as you can see, this is how Zoho Flow's screen looks like. When you first log into Zoho Flow, you'll not have any of these flows or folders. This is the demo account. So we'll just go to a folder and we'll create a new flow. We'll call it folder management. Now here it's asking for what kind of trigger we need to have for this workflow. So there are 6 different kinds of triggers here, but for our use case, we're going to have an app as the trigger, which is Zoho Invoice. So let's click here. We'll now search for Zoho Invoice. and click next. Now, the trigger is invoice created. So we're going to select that and click next. So it's asking for a connection. A connection in Zoho Flow is when you authorize Flow to access your app account to get data as well as to make changes to your data. So in this case, in the case of Zoho Invoice, you need to create a connection that is specific for Zoho Invoice so that Zoho Flow can execute actions automatically. So since I've already created a connection, I'll just select it from here. Otherwise, you'll need to click on the new button and create a connection. It's a very easy process. You just need to approve. So I'm just selecting the one I have here. So when you select a connection, it will automatically fetch the details of the account that is linked to that connection. So here I'll just select this one and click done. Now the trigger has been created. Now let's add the first action. So if you remember, right, the first action is to create a folder in Zoho Work Drive. So how do we do that? On the left side, you can see that there are two sections. One is the apps and the next is logic. You have to search, if you have to search for an app, you can search here. I'll just search for Work Drive and here it is. And if you scroll down, you can see that there is an action called create folder. What I'll do is just click and drag that action into the slot here. And now you can configure this action. And once again, we need to create a connection that's specific to Zoho Work Drive. I'll just select the one I have now. So there's a field called folder name. So what should the folder name be? I want the folder name to be the name of the customer and then the invoice ID related to that customer. So how do we do that? We'll just click here. And for whenever you need to map some data that's coming from the trigger to an action, you can always go to the insert variable section on the right. And you can see that the trigger is available here. Once you click that, you can see all the data points that are coming from this trigger. If you scroll down, you can see there are the customer details, there are the billing details, GST details, and so on. All those details are available here. You can either scroll down or you can just search for your required field here. So I need the variable called customer name, and it's available here. So I'll just click on the field here and then click on the variable. So it gets mapped here. You can see the dollar symbol here. There's a bracket, which means that this variable is mapped to this field, and any value that the variable holds will be moved to this app when the workflow is executed. I'm just going to add a space here and a hyphen, and then I need the invoice ID. So I'll just also search for that. And there it is. So we have the folder name now. I'll just cross-check the organization team and the team folder in Zoho Work Drive. All right, so before I configure this, I'll just quickly show you my Zoho Work Drive interface. So where I want the folder to be created is under team folder, general, I have client documents. I want the new folders to be created as subfolders in this parent folder. Sorry. So I'll just go back to Zoho Flow. I'll just choose the team folder as general. And now under general, I need it to come in client documents. So I'm just going to click that and click done. Now, the first action is configured. What do we need to do now is to create an external share link for this folder. So again, work drive, create external share link, drag and drop into the slot, choose your connection. So once you create a connection for a particular app, you don't have to create it every time you configure a new action for that app. You can use the same connection every time you add another action. So here, let's configure how to create an external share link. So the share link that needs to be generated is for this particular folder that we just created, right? So how do we map that? Just click on the folder or file ID field, go to the create folder action on the right, and you can see that there will be a variable called folder ID. There it is. So this action will look for this particular folder ID and create a share link for that. Now, how do I want the link name to be? So I just need the invoice ID as the link name. So I'll just search for that. Yeah. So we have the invoice ID mapped to the link name. Anyone with the share link can. We need them to upload documents. So I'm just going to select that. We'll just leave the rest of the fields as it is and click done. So we have created the second action. Now, the final action is that you have to send this external share link to the client as an email. So you can use, if you're using Zoho Mail, you can use that. Or you can also use Zoho Flow's on email service, which is available under Logic. On the left side, you can see here there's a Logic tab. Under notifications, there is a send email action, which uses Zoho Flow's on email service. So if you can also, you can add your own email address there so that it goes, uses the from address as your email address, or that email will be delivered from noreply@zohoflow.com. So I'll just drag and drop it here. And because I'm just showing you this as a demo, I'm just going to use my own email address here. So if you have registered an email address here, you will be able to select it from here. But now we're just going to stick with the default address, which is noreply@zohoflow.com. Now, I'll just fill in some dummy values here. And here the message as please upload here. And we need the link name here. So how do we get that? Just the same way we map the variables for the other actions. We'll just click on create external share link, and you have the link variable here. I'll just click on that and it has appeared here. We'll just click done. Now we have created the workflow. So whenever you create a workflow, you can always test that workflow if it is working, if it is executing properly, all the actions are configured and mapped correctly. For now, we'll just switch on the flow and see if it's working. We'll just go to Zoho Invoice. We'll create a new invoice here. I'm just going to enter some dummy values here. All right, I'll just use that. So I've created an invoice. If you go to Zoho Flow's builder, on the right side, you can see there's a history tab. So this will tell us if some execution has occurred. There's a refresh tab here. So you can see here that there is, the flow has been executed. So let's look at the folder now. You can see that under client documents, we have the name, the invoice ID. Now let's look at the mail as well. From noreply@zohoflow.com, we have received the email. Let's click on the link to see if it's going to that folder. And you can see here, it's the same folder. And now the clients can upload their documents to this folder. So as you have seen, how easy it is to create a workflow in Zoho Flow. And you can see how instantly the workflow was executed. which would otherwise take at least 5 minutes for a human to perform all these tasks. All right, so now let's explore some more use cases. All right. So the first use case that we're going to explore is expense management. So imagine this scenario where in your organization, there's, let's say your employees are going for a certain event, and once the event is over, they can come back and get their bills reimbursed. So they would have to submit a report in Zoho Expense. But you want reports of amounts greater than, let's say, $500 to be notified to your finance manager. Now, let's see how this can be built in Zoho Flow. I've already built the workflow. I'll just quickly show you how it looks like in the form of triggers and actions. So here, the report event which we need to use is report submitted. So you can see that in the report event trigger, we have the rule type selected as submitted. You can also choose approved, recalled, all of these. Here, now, when you create any trigger, you will see something called a filter criteria here. So what this does is you don't have to create another condition in your workflow for a trigger. You can just configure it inside a trigger itself. So here I have configured total, which comes from the trigger. You can search for it here, and you can see that there's a total amount greater than 500. So what this does is that it will only let through the trigger data, which has a total amount greater than 500. All of the other entries will be blocked. So that those reports which have amount greater than 500 will be moved to this workflow. And now we have configured an email here, let's say to the finance manager, with all this information like submitted by, which is again taken from the trigger. On the right side, you can see all these variables. You can see submitted by, submitted date, and so on. You also have the expense amount. And I've also mapped report ID here, so it's easy to track and find a particular report. The next action we can also add is a create row action in, let's say, Zoho Sheet, so that all of these reports that have gone beyond a certain amount can be stored in a sheet for, say, an analysis or to track expenses. All right. So now let's go to the second example. In this one, let's imagine that we have a sales team and the finance team. You have, let's say your invoice is supposed to be paid within 7 days of generating it. And if it's not paid after 7 days, you want the sales team to follow up on that. Now, how do we do this? Let's see that. So at first glance, this workflow may look a bit complicated, but it's actually very simple. We have the invoice create trigger using Zoho Books. And then what we have added here is a delay. So this delay, you can find it under logic. You have the delay action here. What it does is it will add a wait time before the next step is executed. So here, since we have a 7-day waiting period for the client to pay, I have added 7 days here. It can also read natural language, so you don't have to write exactly 7 or something. You can just write, let's say if it's 2 weeks, you can write 2 weeks as such. Zoho Flow will automatically detect that. And yeah. So after the delay, what we need to do is fetch the details of that invoice from Zoho Books. So using the invoice ID from the trigger, we'll fetch the details of the invoice after 7 days. And now we have added a decision here. Decision again is from the logic section. What you can do under decision is you can add conditions like this one. So for example, in this one, what I've added is the status of the invoice not equals is the operator and the value is paid. So what it will look for is that if the status of the invoice is not paid, it will take this branch of the workflow. If it is paid, the workflow ends here. So let's see what happens if it is not paid. It will go to this action here, which is message in a click channel, which can be the sales team's common channel. And there you can configure a message, something like follow up with this invoice ID. This customer has not paid within 7 days of creating the invoice. So now they can start the follow up. And let's say after the follow up, you need to wait for another 5 days before we check again. Once again, we add the delay just like how we did here and fetch the invoice again. Repeat the same condition. And now here you have already followed up. And after 12 days of generating the invoice, if it's still not paid, we'll have one more reminder to the sales team. All right. So you can configure it with more actions in case it's the workflow is different in your team, but it's totally up to you. Now let's look at another example as well. We have a few more examples here. All right, so this one's very interesting. It's kind of similar to the example that we just explored. So for this one, you have to imagine that there is, you are in a shipment or delivery business. So you may have a warehouse team who takes care of all your shipments and deliveries, and you have your finance team, you have your procurement team creating purchase orders. So imagine that whenever a purchase order is created, it's created with a 7-day expiry, before which the vendor has to build that purchase order and approve it. So what we need here is that when the purchase order is created, we need to wait for that 7-day expiry period. And then we need to create a task in Zoho projects for the warehouse team only if that purchase order is billed, so that they can start preparing for the delivery and to get the paperwork done and all that. We also need to instantly create an event in their calendar with the expected delivery date. Let's see how this is done. So here, the trigger is purchase order created in Zoho Books. And right after that, we have added a delay of 7 days, just like the previous workflow that we just saw. And similar to that one, again, we have the fetch purchase order to get the latest details of that purchase order. And here we have a decision that checks if the status equals billed. All right. So if it is billed, that means we have to create a task in Zoho projects and then create a calendar event in Zoho calendar. Now, let's look at another example. All right. So in this one, we are going to create a new vendor and take them through the whole vendor onboarding process that involves signing a contract and getting it updated in Zoho Books. So this is a 2 workflow use case. So in this one, how we should start is that when you create a new vendor in Zoho Books, you need to send a contract from Zoho Contracts and get it signed, right? So sending it is the first step. So that becomes our first workflow. And once the document is signed, you need to update the vendor details in Zoho Books. So here, what we need to do is that in the first one, you need to create a document, a template in Zoho Contracts, and use that template in the action here. And the second workflow should use the same contract or the document ID in the trigger and then see if it's signed, right? And then update the vendor details. We already have a document signed trigger for Zoho Contracts, so you'll not need any other conditions, just like how we explored in the last example. You have a trigger called document signed, so that will directly trigger your workflow, and you can update the vendor details as approved or document signed. With this example, we are going to explore how we can analyze transactions, especially cancel subscriptions that you have. So this use case goes like this. You have a lot of subscriptions every month. You have hundreds of subscriptions that are coming in every month, and you need to check if what is causing a certain number of subscriptions to go canceled. And you also want to send a feedback survey to those customers who have canceled your subscriptions. So how we will do this here is we'll start with a subscription cancel trigger in Zoho Billing. So whenever a subscription is canceled, it will fetch a contact detail or fetch the details of that particular contact from Zoho CRM. And then it will add the details that are collected from the subscription cancel trigger as well as the CRM details to Zoho Analytics as a new row. It'll also send a designated feedback survey to that client from Zoho Survey. You can also expand this workflow or create another workflow itself with response received in Zoho Survey as the trigger, and then send that data also to Zoho Analytics. So it will give you a much broader insight on why your subscriptions are getting canceled. So this, you can work together with your sales and marketing teams to improve your business, basically. All right, so let's go to the last example of the webinar. So this is a very popular workflow among finance and e-commerce businesses especially. So I'm pretty sure that if you're into e-commerce, you would be using one of the three apps here, which are WooCommerce, Shopify, or Zoho Commerce. So you would have an inventory with you, and you would be using an app like Zoho Inventory if you have to manage that. So let's say you make a change or an adjustment to your inventory, and you need to reflect that detail in your e-commerce site. It's a very simple workflow. The trigger should be inventory adjustment made in Zoho Inventory, and the action should be update product details in any of these e-commerce app. So whenever an adjustment is made, all the details, including the stock count, the prices, descriptions, or whatever that may be, will get updated in your e-commerce app. So I hope that I was able to give you a variety of use cases touching different applications on how to build these workflows for a finance team. Now, these are just simple examples that you can take inspiration from and look at your other workflows in your team or your organization. So what you need to do essentially is to look at your organization, see what's happening on a day-to-day basis. What are you working on? And what are the apps that you're using to get your work done? And see how data is moving from one app to the other to complete a certain work. And once you have this clarity of how data is moving between your apps, you can then start designing them in the form of workflows. And once you have those workflow diagrams ready, it becomes so much easier for you to just replicate that in Zoho Flow, because you have the interface that is like completely intuitive for to build a workflow diagram. And once you start building like 10, 20 different workflows, you will start loving how much you will start seeing the results, and you will start to realize how much of work can be automated in an organization. So I think with that, I hope I was able to give you something of value. I was able to help you with understanding workflows and to help you explore a lot of workflow use cases. So yeah, thank you all for listening. I'm going to end my presentation here. We'll move on to the question and answer session here. We had a glitch in the poll, so we'll try to fix it. We'll try to give that poll once again. But in the meantime, please do scan this QR code and register for Zoholix US, which will be happening on May 13th to 15th. So yeah, please do scan the QR code if you would like to register for that. All right. I'll just wait for a minute before we move to the question and answer session. All right. So we'll start the Q&A now. You can start asking your questions. Remy and I will be there to answer them. So we will end the session in a few more, maybe in another 5 minutes. You can continue to ask questions if you have any. So yeah, once again, thank you all for joining. Make sure that you're there for the next Zoho Flow for Zoho One webinar. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to wind up now. Thank you, everyone. See you again next time. Goodbye.